Remember a couple of months back when sources close to Meghan Markle said that she has a freakish attention to detail? Well, not anymore. I have a lawyer from Washington, D.C., John Witherspoon, that's going to actually explain what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle Archewell Foundation's delinquency notice actually means, and more importantly, what's going to happen next. Hey up everyone, it's me, Stef, the Alter Nerd, your nerdy alternative, and welcome to another dose of the Daily Nerd, where I break down the royal news and gossip of the day that's pretty much caught me eye. And oh my goodness, yes, let's jump into this, shall we, with a very, very special guest. Yes, lawyer from Washington, D.C., John Witherspoon. How are you doing today, mate?
I'm good, Steph. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. Kind of recovering from a little bit of a sore throat, so do excuse me there, guys. But yes, I had to bring John on, and he was gracious enough to take some time out of his day to do this because, oh my goodness, this has been all over the news. As you said before we actually started this recording, you Google Hazard and Megxy now, there's nothing about their Nigerian trip. This has just flooded Google and the news feed, and I think I can hear plates being smashed in Montecito Royale right now because Megxy definitely, I would say, is not happy about any of this. But John, I mean, my first question to you is, when you saw this headline, what was your reaction to it all?
Well, it's they're not the first people to have this problem, and they won't be the last. But at the same time, Archewell is portraying itself as a very, very important entity, and they're, impacting people's lives around the globe, or so they claim. And they fancy themselves to be a very high functioning operation. And what this situation kind of says is maybe that's not quite the case. Um, any charitable organization usually has to register in two places. One of them is with the Internal Revenue Service, which for people outside of the United States is the tax collection organization. It's part of the United States Department of the Treasury. And when you pay your income taxes, you pay it to the IRS, and they take the money and go. If you are tax exempt, then you have to register with them, and you have to explain exactly why you're tax exempt, or you want to be tax exempt. It's not a given. And then they do some evaluation, and they send you back a form that says, okay, fine, we've accepted you, and you are going to have, in most cases, what they call a 501c3 status, which means that you don't have to pay federal income tax on gifts that you receive or purchases that you make and all of that type of thing. The other place that you have to register is normally with the state where you are operating your your charitable organization. And in this case, that's obviously the state of California, where Montecito is. And if you look at the letter that Steph has up on the screen, you can see that it is from Rob Bonta, who's the Attorney General of the state of California within the Department of Justice. And you can see there that it has been mailed to the Archewell Foundation on Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, which is, Wilshire Boulevard is a very prestigious street. And so I'm sure it's a very high rent office space that they have there where their main employees are located. And they have a state charity registration number and so forth. However, right at the top in bold, dark letters, it says delinquency notice and warning of assessment and penalties and late fees and suspension or revocation of registered status. So what you have to do once you have initially registered with the state of California, which they did back in 2021, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and every year following that, and in most cases it's on May 15th, which, if you want to be technical, is the 15th day of the 5th month after your fiscal year ends. They end on December 31st, so May 15th. They are required to file an update. And the reason for that is that the state of California, appropriately so, wants to know what's going on in your charity, because if you're collecting money or you're sending this money out and you're presumably exempt from California sales tax and income tax, they want to keep track of all that stuff because there's a lot of money involved and they don't want anybody gaming the system. So most organizations, and I know Steph has talked about, she's been a part of an organization like this. I've been a part of an organization like this, and I've helped other people in similar organizations. You just know it's like April 15th in the US, that's when your personal income tax is due. Okay, in May 15th, on May 15th of every year in the state of California, your paperwork is due to exempt yourself for another 12 months from the usual rules that would apply to anybody else who is, running an organization of some sort. So if they don't file that, the state figures it out eventually, and then they start sending out these nasty grams, like the one I was just reading from here from Attorney General Bonta. And basically it says very explicitly what it is that they want you to do. The interesting thing here, as far as the press coverage of this story and what Harry and Meghan's or someone's at Archewell, somebody's explanation has been, oh, well, we sent the check in and it must have gotten lost in the mail, or it fell on the floor, or, the dog ate it, or whatever excuse you want to dredge up. Interestingly, you can go on the web and you can file all these things electronically. So it's a little bit of a red herring to me for them to say, oh, well, we sent the check in, it didn't get there. That may have been the case, but it just seems a little bit odd because this all could have been done, as I said, electronically on the web.
Now,
So
John,
that's basically where this all started.
yeah. Now, going on to other documents that we found, and thank you to John for doing a lot of this behind the scenes. So we can see here, in terms of the registrant details from the state of California, from the office of the AG here, that yes, the registry status is now officially delinquent, and they were actually supposed to hand in all the documents that were required and pay the fees literally this time last year. So we're talking the 15th of May 2023. Now, their accounting period is literally between the 1st of January to the 31st of December. So like John said, because their last day is the 31st of December, then you're looking on, okay, then the deadline is in the 5th month after that by the 15th, which again is the 15th of May. Now, who essentially is responsible in Archewell Foundation to actually hand everything in and make sure that everything is paid up with the IRS? Well, it looks here potentially it's James Hull. He is listed as a principal officer name, and the address being the same as Wilshire Boulevard. Who is James Hull? Well, he's the executive director and president of the Archewell Foundation and gets paid a whopping $227,405 a year. For someone to be paid that much, and yes, potentially be the representative to the IRS to have everything handed in and paid, and he doesn't do it, yeah, something is definitely amiss. But it looks like James Holt could be the fall guy for Harry and Meghan to turn around and say, well, look, we ain't the principal officer here. It's James Holt. He was the one that didn't hand everything in time. So don't blame us, blame James. Is that something that could actually realistically happen, John?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would presume, as you said, for all the money that he's getting paid, that he would be very diligent about making sure that these kinds of things didn't happen. As I said, I mean, it's no secret that these forms need to be filed and be filed on a certain date. Comes around every year. You can put it in your, Google Calendar or whatever you use, and be reminded that, hey, this stuff has to get filed. Now, again, they're claiming that it was filed and they just figured it out, but I'm skeptical of that because, number one, if you write a check, you would eventually say to yourself, well, gosh, where was the check? Why did the check not go through? We wrote a check to the state of California and it hasn't come through in my bank statement, or my credit card has not been charged for this. So again, it's probably on James Holt, and I'm guessing that it was just something that they just didn't file, and now the chickens have come home to roost.
Yeah, now the chickens have definitely come home to roost because essentially what happens next? They've got this delinquency notice. So if they don't comply with that, so if it's not remedied, then it looks like here that their status will then be changed from delinquent to then suspended and or revoked. Now, putting it in layman's terms, John, what does that then mean?
Well, suspended means that you're in even more trouble, not surprisingly, and revoked is the most onerous of all. When they basically say you are no longer a charity, if you want to be a charity again, you not only have to reapply, but you're probably going to have to explain how this all got so fouled up the first time around. Normally, suspension or revoked is, I would think, a status that would be used if people have basically said, you know what, we're not going to have our charity anymore. We're just going to walk away from it. And these are just sort of two last ditch efforts that the state of California is going to come along and say, are you really sure you want to, walk away from this? We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that we don't have to effectively shut you down. But this is sort of like, all right, you've got 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes, and then it's all over. So they do have some time to remedy this. And as I said, this is not a terribly uncommon situation. It's more of an embarrassing situation than it to be a sort of a red alert situation for them. But they definitely need to get it straightened out for the sake of embarrassment, and also for the sake of, as Steph mentioned, the fact that if you're in this delinquent status, it affects your ability to conduct business. And I think that's by design, because they want you to take it very seriously. If there weren't some restrictions that were placed on you when you got into delinquent status, everybody would sort of say, oh, well, I'll get around to it when I feel like it. But they've basically said, you need to take care of this, and you need to take care of it right away. You need to file some paperwork explaining why you were not able to get this done when you should have gotten it done. I believe there's a penalty involved with it. There may be actually even a daily penalty. I'm not entirely sure on that, but there's definitely a financial penalty that I think comes into play. And then you have to go back. And the other problem with it is, then once you've been in delinquent status, then I believe that kind of stays on the website, where if somebody goes to look for you, then they say, oh, gosh, well, they were delinquent at one point. Wow, that's kind of odd. Why would that have happened? Maybe they don't have their act together.
Well, with that being said, do check out my next video, guys, because I'm going to go into this a little bit more. And there is potentially a possibility that they've already violated this delinquency notice, opinion, conspiracy theory, whatever. So I'm going to go through that in the next video that's going to be released in a couple of hours' time. So do stay tuned for that. In the meantime, though, again, what happens next? Because there's something else that's actually upcoming, because we've been talking about how they've not fully filed correctly their 2022 charity fiscal year. However, 2023 is due, because as we've explained, their charity fiscal year is between the 1st of January and the 31st of December. For this case now, 2023. And with a fiscal year ending in December 31st, their due date is May the 15th, which is literally, as of the timing of this film, tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
So if they do not file correctly and in full their 2023 filing, with this current delinquency notice already on their records, what's going to happen then? Do you know?
Well, it'll get more serious. And if the worst would be if they just ignored it, and then it would, as we said, go into suspension and then into revocation. The one thing I will point out, just so that nobody gets too excited, is that there is a delay usually between the time you file the paperwork and the time that it appears on a website for either the state of California or for the Internal Revenue Service or whoever it is. So, just because something is not there on Thursday or Friday of this week doesn't mean that they've messed up again. So I just throw that out there as a caution. But in this instance that generated this letter that we were talking about, that certainly needs to be taken care of very quickly.
Mm. And it looks like they're kind of running a little bit of like a Mickey Mouse operation, because you directed my attention to this website, the state of Delaware website, and this particular PDF here, because it looks like Archewell Foundation is also registered in the state of Delaware. But you directed my attention to the registered agent information and that there's this unassigned agent. So, what does that mean, and why does that give you a lot of concern?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a lot of concern, but I would say it's very unusual for an organization the size of Archewell. And the state of Delaware, people in the US may or may not know this, and probably outside the world are not aware of it. The state of Delaware is a very small state on the East Coast, just north of Washington, D.C. And it happens to be a state that is very business friendly. And it also has a lot of tax advantages to be registered there. And in fact, just as a point of trivia, if you ever see an American flagged oil tanker, for instance, and you look at the back of it and it says, instead of London or Hamilton, Bermuda, invariably it will say Wilmington, Delaware. And the reason is because of the fact that Delaware is a very, very good place to organize a business from a commercial standpoint. So the business about the registered agent means that if someone wants to, let's say, file a lawsuit against Archewell, or they want to, let's say they have money that they owe to Archewell that they found and they want to give it, or the state of Delaware wants to contact Archewell, presumably there is an actual person that's listed somewhere else on their on the Delaware website, but the fallback is a very important person, and that person's name is typically called a registered agent. So if you can't get in touch with the main person, you can always go to Plan B, and Plan B is the registered agent, but they haven't listed one here. And that's just a very dangerous way to conduct business because, as I said, if there's a lawsuit or some litigation that comes up and you can't find either the primary contact or the registered agent, well, guess what? Now you're in a situation where whoever's trying to sue you can go into court and they can say, hey, we did everything we possibly could to get in touch with somebody at Archewell, and we couldn't do it. So, Mr. Judge or Miss Judge, please give us a default judgment. And if that happens, then that opens up a whole other unpleasant scenario where they can go in and start taking property and seizing property and bank accounts and everything like that. So that's a long-winded explanation for a short question, but it's important because it just indicates the extent to which they may not be doing their business at Archewell. I say may, in a way that would normally be optimal. I would think you would go through any other business comparable to Archewell, even the Red Cross or a soup kitchen or whatever it is that's been incorporated in Delaware, and you'd be able to look and see, okay, well, here's the main contact and here's the registered agent. And I know that there are two options if we ever really need to get in touch with these people for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing it earlier on again before we recorded this video. And, personally for me, I was part of a charity at one point, the running of a charity. I was their honourable treasurer. First and foremost, in the UK, we have the Charity Commission that oversees everything, that regulates our charitable sector, and where we have to submit all our filings, returns, fees to, the whole lot, right? The charity that I was a part of, nowhere near as big as Archewell Foundation. Assets under £100,000, right, guys? So we're not talking anywhere as large. But I still made sure, even such a small charity, to submit the filings in time, to get everything paid on time. So for a charity as big, multi-million-dollar charity as big as Archewell Foundation, to not do that, to me, is absolutely taking the mick. And then secondly, not actually having an assigned agent registered online. Again, it's absolutely taking the mick, because personally for me, the charity that I was a part of, we did have, let's, use the same phrase here, an assigned agent on the charity commission, right? And so if a small charity in comparison to Archewell Foundation can follow the rules, which are pretty much the same rules really in the grand scheme of things, then why isn't Archewell Foundation doing that? It's absolutely insane, right, John?
Yeah, it's a very valid question, and I think it's a fair one to ask. And maybe somebody will ask one of Harry or Meghan at one point. It's like, hey, why don't you have your paperwork any more lined up than you apparently do? It's a fair question.
Or maybe, from what we discussed earlier on, they won't answer the question and they could actually just make James Holt the fall guy and just put all the blame on him rather than answering the important questions that are being asked at the moment to try and divert attention away from the answers that they really don't want out there, I would say. With that being said, thanks to John for joining into today's Daily Nerd. I really appreciate your face, mate. But guys, if you haven't done so already, on your way out, make sure you subscribe, like, share, comment, all of that good stuff. And as I said, stay tuned for the next Daily Nerd that's going to be released in a couple of hours' time, because I'm going to explain how, in my opinion, conspiracy theory, whatever, Harry and Meghan may have already broken the delinquency and violated it. You won't want to miss that. But with that being said, thank you so much for tuning into this Daily Nerd. Appreciate your faces. And until the next time, you guys, laters.